Welcome to Discipleship 24/7. I'm your host, Mr. Blake. Thank you for joining. This month we're looking at, the month of May, we're looking at the book of John, chapter 15, verses 1 through 6. And we're looking at a well-known passage, perhaps you're familiar with it. It is where Jesus talks about that Jesus says, the true vine. I'm going to read verses 1 through 6 for us, starting with 15. This is from the NLT Bible. It says, I am the true grapevine, and my Father is the gardener. He cuts off every branch of mine that does not produce fruit, and he prunes the branches that do bear fruit, so they will produce even more. You have already been pruned and purified by the message I have given you. Remain in me, and I will remain in you. For a branch cannot produce fruit if it's severed from the vine, and you cannot be fruitful unless you remain in me. Verse 5, yes, I am the vine, you are the branches. Those who remain in me, and I in them will produce much fruit. For apart of me, you can do nothing. Anyone who does not remain in me is thrown away like a useless branch and withers. Such branches are gathered into a pile to be burned. But if you remain in me and my words remain in you, you may ask for anything you want and it will be granted. Verse 8, when you produce much fruit, you are my true disciple. This brings great glory to my Father. So I went a little further up to verse 8, but we see that Jesus is the source of life in this passage. And if you're not familiar, John chapter 14 talks about Jesus is the way. He says, if you ever read that, it says, I am the way. Talks about, I am the way. John chapter 14, verse 6, I am the way. There's not another way. There's not a second pass. There's not a second opportunity or a passage. I am the way. And that's something you can read later in John 14. John 15, this 1 through 8 talks about that Jesus is the true vine. And we see two scenarios from this passage, and that is a vine branch. Yeah, you can see behind me there's a green tree. Supposedly if we cut a limb off a tree and it's green and just set it out in the open, right, in the sun, just cut a branch off, we'll see in a few days that it'll start to wither. It'll start to turn brown. It won't grow. It will just shrivel up. And so we see that the two branches in the passage of John, one is fruit bearing. Fruit bearing, that's something that we all want, is if you go by a fruit tree, I would hope that your fruit tree bears much fruit. If not, there's a problem, which is a branch that is barren. There's no fruit on it. It's empty. It's not doing anything. So those are the two branches. So verses 1 and 2, Jesus says he is the true grapevine and the Father's the gardener. So the gardener is the one who's deciding, hey, should we keep this branch? Should we get rid of it? And every branch of mine that does not produce fruit, in verse 2, is prune, cut off. As believers, brothers and sisters in Christ, we should be fruit-bearing branches. That is a sign, or I wouldn't say sign, but that's how one knows how they're doing in a relationship with God. Everyone's like, hey, how do I know my relationship with God is spot on, or is it right on track, or am I doing things right as a believer? When we do these self-examinations or these self-questions, we go back to it, are we bearing fruit? Are we bearing fruit? And then it continues on in verse 2 that he prunes branches that do bear fruit so that they produce even more. So that is a healthy practice in gardening. You prune branches that are withered, that are not doing anything, no fruit, and then you prune the ones that are so it can produce more. Verse 3 says, you've already been pruned and purified by the message I have given you. Remain in me, and I will remain in you. For a branch cannot produce fruit if it's severed from the vine. It's true. And so we need to realize that important part, because he repeats it several times. Remain in me, and I will remain in you. So are we remaining in Christ? Are we focused? Are we strong? Are we remaining in Christ? Because that goes back down to, if we're not bearing fruit, then what is in our relationship, or what is pushing our relationship apart that's not bearing fruit? And so it goes back to, are we remaining in Christ? Being a Christian, one must be connected to Jesus. It's the word we use a lot, called abide in. Some passages or some versions of the Bible will use we see the word abide. Or we abide in. Or abiding. Are we connected with Jesus? That is the important part. I know we just got off a big month for us, which is Easter Sunday. And hopefully many of us are contacting those that have showed up to the church doors and showed up to the church service. And hopefully your church is contacting them again, and to really continue on with answering their questions or answering the needs that they have. Because some folks don't realize that churches have Bible studies now. Everything's back open in the pandemic. Churches are back open. Bible studies are back open. Men's ministry, women's ministry, youth ministry, things are back open, because we realize in a church how important the other ministries outside of worship service on Sunday are important for brothers and sisters in Christ. And so we need to stay connected. We just got done with Easter, and now we need to keep going on, keep going forward, and that is stay connected. Stay connected. And so in verse 5, he repeats again, saying, yes, I am the vine, you are the branches. Those who remain in me, and I in them, will produce much fruit. Apart from me, you can't do nothing. Sure, we could do something on our own. We could try to do things on our own. We could say, you know what, I got this, Lord. I got the strength to do this on my own. And we can do that. That's a choice that some of us have made in life, where it's like, I can do this on my own without you. But we come to find out, as verse 5 reminds us, that for apart from me, you can do nothing. And a brutal reminder in verse 6, anyone who does not remain in me is thrown away like a useless branch and withers. Such branches are gathered into a pile to be burned. Ouch. So this is something that we're familiar with. This is something that we are familiar with as believers in Christ. And this leads me to another passage. It leads me to a passage of Colossians. Colossians. So Colossians chapter 1, verse 23. This is how I would say, because again, producing fruit is going to be the evidence. Are we focused on Christ? Are we abiding in Christ? Are we following faithfully in Christ? And then Colossians chapter 1, verse 23 says, but you must continue to believe this true and stand firm in it. Do not drift away from the assurance you received when you heard the good news. The good news has been preached all over the world, and I, Paul, have been appointed to as God's servant to proclaim it. Continue to believe. Don't drift away. Sometimes we drift away. Sometimes we wander off course. Think about sheep. Sheep in their pastures. There's always one or two sheep that get out and wander away. That's why there's a shepherd. You and I might wander away. We might drift away, or just go on, the shoulder of the road and not the road. Veer off. And that's where we need to do a self-evaluation. Am I producing fruit? Am I focused on Christ? Am I digging into the Word? Am I on course, or am I drifting? And it's so important for us, And what's going to help us is, am I connected to a Bible study in my local church? Am I connected to brothers and sisters in Christ beyond Sunday? Beyond Sunday. And that's so important these days, that we need to stay connected, stay focused so we don't drift away. That's what I have for us. And hopefully that this is an encouraging message for you, and that maybe it's a self-evaluation for you. And may God encourage you and encourage your church body to continue to stay focused, continue to stay on the path, that we continue to share the good news. As Colossians says, the good news was preached. We just got from sharing the good news of Easter Sunday with everybody. And hopefully we continue to share that good news again and again. Covering all in prayer. Thank you for watching. Hope this has been encouraging for you. Discipleship 24/7. Mr. Blake, covering everyone in prayer as we continue to reach out, share, study the Word.